Right, good morning everybody. Let us get this party started. We are kicking off the latest in a series of intelligent acquisition, seminars. They started life as real life events, transmogrified into webinars for the purposes of the pandemic. Who knows, maybe just maybe the next one might even be back in real life again. That would be nice, wouldn't it? What a nice thought that would be. But anyway, you're all very welcome. And just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Davis. I'm the Managing Director of Whistle's Door Drop division. And these events are presented as a sort of collaboration between ourselves, Edit, and the Letter Shop Group. So I'm grateful to Alistair and to Ben, who will be speaking with me shortly, to say, help put these events on and to publicise them. So thank you also to our speakers, and I'll introduce those in due course, who spared some time out of their busy schedules to come and share their wisdom with you. And above all, to you for joining and visiting our virtual room, so that we can tell you more about what's going on in the world of intelligent acquisition. So, without any further ado, this is our crew of speakers for this morning, and a wide and varied assortment for you. So in addition to myself and Ben, Media Director of Edit, and Alistair, Managing Director of Letter Shop Group, we've got a number of clients and agency partners who've agreed to share some wisdom with us. So the agenda will be in due course, but there's a snapshot of people, so you know who's on the bill. A few housekeeping issues I just wanted to kind of come up with. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so absolutely for the speakers you can share it with your mums, and for participants you can go back and see your best bits or share it with other people in the office who weren't able to join this morning. So yeah, so we're recording all of this. All participants are the mics are going to be muted. Okay, so unfortunately you won't be able to talk. Our speakers will talk, but you won't be able to during this session. However, you can communicate with us, and indeed that is encouraged using the chat and Q&A, or the Q&A functions, and we'll do a questions and answer sessions at the end. So if you have a particular question that comes up as a result of it, hang on to it, or put it into the chat as it goes, into the Q&A as it goes. Try to address it to somebody specific, or if it's a general question, do that. That will be fine. Outside of that, there's no protocols. Okay, if you smell smoke, it's probably your house that's burning, not mine. So please take whatever steps you would normally do. And normally we tell you to turn your phones off, but we won't. You know, your rules. Okay. Without any further ado, here's our lineup. So me giving you a morning welcome. Then we're going to move to Mark Cross, who is going to give us the latest JICMail insights, the latest release from Q2 this year, just out, so hot from the oven. Alistair and Nigel from Sky, delighted to say that they're going to collaborate on giving us some creative insights. That's a critical part of obviously our whole process. Is the physical creative item. So some great insights into the art of what's possible these days in print. And then, we have a slight change. Apologies for that, but we actually have Jodie from Edit, speaking alongside Karen, giving us some insight into the RSPCA activity of late, which spans all postal channels, which is great. I'll be popping up again to talk a little bit more about the planning side of things, the data piece. And then Ben from Edit will talk about how all the things we're talking about today will fit into a wider media strategy, how you integrate the postal side, the print side into your other work. And lastly, but definitely not least, I'm really delighted to welcome Jamie and Andy from Hurdle and Jamie from Wheezy to speak a bit more about how Door Drops, how physical print is supporting online businesses. So that will be our kind of conclusion. And then I'll wrap up, we'll answer any questions and send you on your way. Okay, that's the plan. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over, I'm going to shut myself off and pass over to Mark Cross, who is the engagement director at Jigmail, and he is going to tell us about the latest activity from he's recorded from Jigmail. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to give you probably some 4 or 5, hopefully, fundamental truths as captured by Jigmail, your industry kind of currency of research for across mail, relevant to acquisition planning. I'm going to speed through probably, as I say, over the next about 15 minutes or so. So thanks, Mark. Next chart, please. I think that's it. Great. And I think this is a summary chart. And if you take one thing from today, what our Jigmail data shows, and this is a trend over the last 4 years since we've been capturing the data, is that mail has impact across all the acquisition channels, across the full customer journey. So what you can see here are 2 lines. The top line is the extent to which mail drives online traffic, visits to websites. And you can see the patterns most recently across lockdown, really interesting. And on the left-hand side, you can see the percentages. So you can see a very high uptick in online traffic across the lockdown era, the COVID era, if you like. So there's been a step change in these commercial effects from mail. It is very stable and it's a much higher level. The turquoise line below is the extent to which mail drives people in store. And obviously that dipped in lockdown, as you can see very clearly from our data, as soon as the stores open. Then of course that lifts again. And the most recent data, the Q2 data release, which Mark referred to, shows again a very significant uptick in the extent to which mail is driving people in the store. So well beyond your direct attribution of your direct response from mail, there are probably twice as many digital effects, and certainly the same amount again in terms of actually real world effects of driving people in the store. So Jigmail gives you that comprehensive picture of the full effects of mail. Thank you, Mark. So I know most of you will be very familiar with Jigmail, so I don't really want to spend too much time explaining who we are and what we do. But essentially, we're the world's biggest capture of mail journeys. And the important thing to say for those of you that don't know us is that, we are probably, I haven't got my camera on, so that's probably not very friendly, is it? So for those of you that don't know who we are basically owned by the industry. So we're jointly owned by the sell side and the buy side. We are chaired by the DMA. We have representation from ISBAR, the agencies, as well as, of course, from people like Whistle and Royal Mail on our board. I run the program on behalf of the team, and we capture using 1,000 households a month, the mail journeys of mail that comes into people's homes, and they record all the interactions with that mail over a 28-day period using a diary-based app that you can see there. We have almost 200,000 mail journeys in the database. We release the data every quarter, and as Mark said, we just recently released the Q2 data, and we have over 100 subscribers across all sectors of the industry. There's a very neat video on the website. Only take you 3 minutes to view it. That explains the methodology. So if you've got questions around the methodology, if it's new to you, then I'd recommend just kind of jumping onto the website and looking at that video. Thank you, Mark. So just going to run through then. So what we're doing, we're capturing all the interactions with mail over that monthly period, and we've been doing it for 4 years. So Jigmail gives you a whole raft of metrics beyond the volume of mail you're sending. And one of the core metrics we capture is the frequency of interaction, which is broadly between 3 to 5 times higher than the volumes you're sending. And that's what people are actually, how they're interacting with the mail, what they physically do with it. They pick it up, open it, they put it to one side. All those interactions are captured. This chart is showing a year-on-year growth and comparison of mail frequency over the last 2 years. And you can see that there's a slight kind of bulge around the lockdown period last year. And I think we claim a modest growth in the core baseline exposure of audiences to your mail items as they go through the household. So against that core physical interactions, we then overlay these secondary actions we're capturing. like we've seen, whether people are going in store or whether they're kind of going online. So if you start doing the build, as we've got here, you can see a bit more of a lively line there when it comes to making a purchase. So there's been an uptick in direct purchasing from mail over the last, across 2020. And really, we're using 2020 here as an example because we think it's a fundamental year that changed some of the media behaviours around mail. So Mark, if you then overlay some of these other secondary actions. So here, we're looking at visits online. If I can read that that line myself, it's a bit small for me, but basically each mail impression, that frequency is becoming more efficient, and in this case, it's driving kind of web traffic, and you can see significant year-on-year increases in 2020 on web traffic from mail. And Mark, if you had another line. And indeed, the more kind of serious intentions of looking up your account details online, that too has lifted. And if you overlay the final one, you get the pattern of actually overall kind of web traffic, web browsing. And you can see there that that's the percentage increase is dramatic. So again, 2020 has given us the evidence of something really interesting happening where your basic impressions from mail, which are very significant, way above your volumes you get from mail, are actually converting really kind of well into commercial actions and commercial activity, such as the digital traffic, or as we've seen, the kind of real world in-store traffic as well. So I think that's a big takeout from this morning, is that mail effectiveness, the dynamics of mail effectiveness have changed, and mail effectiveness has increased, as evidenced by the patterns we picked up across 2020. Thanks, Mark. So one of the things that everyone will be concerned about when it comes to acquisition is the cost of acquisition. And obviously there's a perceptual high cost with mail that has been a bit of a barrier. But again, with JICmail data and the tools that we can give you, that cost comparison actually, when measured in audience terms, is quite different. So here is a snapshot from our audience comparison tool, which is online, and it's fully explained online. So there's quite a lot here on this chart. So I'll just kind of skim through the sort of top line on it. But what it's saying is that actually you get more than you pay for with something like door drops. And when you put cost into that equation, the cost per thousand conversion compares very favorably to digital channels, much against what you might expect. So here, if you look at that very top line, this is taking a scenario of having £100,000 of budget planned against ABC1 adults, and you want to use the tool to compare online with offline channels. So you see the two horizontal comparisons of mail versus online. And again, if you just sort of follow the line for door drops, just to explain what you're looking at a bit more. So for £100,000 at 5p an item, that equates to a cost per thousand item of £50 for door drops. And that means that will buy you about 2 million door drops, purchased impacts. So what the impacts you're actually buying, according to sort of standard industry measures. But if you then apply the JICmail data, the audience data to it, actually those 2 million convert up to 5.6 million actual delivered impacts. So dramatically more than the volume-based calculation. And of course, these delivered impacts are the actual equivalent currencies used in other channels. So this tool is trying to use these equivalent currencies and comparisons to make a like-for-like comparison. So in cost per thousand based on audiences rather than volume, that £50 goes right down to £17.81. So that shows versus your purchased impacts, a dramatic improvement in efficiency, 64% cheaper when measured in audience impacts terms versus the volume impacts terms. And what's the great about the tool, and again, there's quite a lot of method to it, which is explained, is that you can make these comparisons against the other channels, and that sort of improved efficiency conversion to audiences doesn't necessarily happen everywhere else. So if you look at the online lines very kind of briefly, digital display, for example, is purchased at an average of £1.90. We should say that the Kite Factory was our media partner for actually giving us these cost comparisons for this tool. And obviously that then, that sort of a cheap cost per headline cost per thousand, that buys you an awful lot of purchase impacts. But of course, in a world of viewability, where fractions of seconds mean that's not what you get, so your delivered numbers of impacts are much less, much reduced. So your £1.90 goes up to that headline figure of £3.17. So that direction of efficiency is going in the opposite direction. And obviously what you're comparing there, okay, it's cost per thousand equivalent based on audiences, but it's cost per thousand of an item that's live in your home for several days in the case of door drops, but in the case of digital display, fractions of seconds. So and then you can see that again, some of these kind of how the sort of efficiency moves in these other channels. Something like pay-per-click, search, obviously it's a very individualistic comparison. You get no other audiences from your search behavior, so the £50 comes in audience impacts terms the same as your purchased impact cost per thousand, so that's £50. But all of a sudden we can say here that against something like search, the cost per thousand based on audiences of door drops is about a third of the cost of search, which again is very different to the perception of the industry. So Mark, yeah, in the next chart, please. Looking at the same scenario, and it's making that comparison as I was just kind of discussing, really, the £17.81 cost per thousand, the fair comparison based on audience delivery, according to Gmail, and comparing it to other industry norms versus search, and something like email. So again, we're being, email suffers from reality. Again, it appears to be relatively cheap. So email cost per thousand for £100,000 buys you something like 3 million impacts. But with the reality of open rates being so low, that converts to delivered impacts much less, only 700,000 in that case. So we've got 5.5 million delivered impacts and door drops versus 700,000 from email. And of course, when you put cost in the mix there, all of a sudden, email efficiency looks incredibly expensive. So the key point of this is please do kind of put your own scenario, go to the tool, understand it. Again, we'll support you if you want to be kind of taken through it in more detail, but it fundamentally changes the cost relationship between some of these acquisition channels based upon a like-for-like kind of audience comparison. Thank you very much. Now, next one. So, so hopefully, mail effectiveness has changed fundamentally. Cost efficiency is different to what you might expect. And the other thing we're trying to support with Gmail is just to encourage users to test and learn. So if some of these effects, some of these insights, if they're open to question, which is fair enough, then at the very least, what we should do as we try and drive growth in the economy and recovery and think about new routes for acquisition is to test and learn. So we just illustrated a couple of scenarios using Gmail data here to make that point. And I think the overall kind of context being that most marketers these days would like to know how their marketing is working more effectively than they do. So there's only about 65% have a good sense of the impact of their marketing campaigns. So how can you build your knowledge on what works? Well, you need to systematically test and learn. So we're just taking some basic scenarios here from Gmail. Thank you, Mark. And looking at some tests you might think about. Again, in a very sort of basic, simple way, a control versus test experiment. What would that look like using Gmail insights? Well, Gmail data shows that the impact of running local content in your mail has a dramatic impact and an uplift in terms of footfall or people intending to make a large purchase. So in this scenario here, the A/B test is simply running vouchers in both cases, but in the B sample, adding local content, which can be a store map, a name of your local manager, and we just got an example of that coming up next. Mark, thank you. Here we've got a couple of local examples from Co-op and from Sainsbury's, from Mere Green Store, or even Orford Road Lane. So again, just a localization, and that, according to Gmail Insight, has a dramatic impact on your outcome. So the other thing we can do is set up that hypothesis, but also provide you with benchmarks for your A/B testing. So thank you, Mark. Next one. So against your planned measures for the test, you can use our benchmarks, which should suggest that for mail that contains local services and vouchers and local services, They are 2.5 times more likely to drive visits to a store, and almost twice as likely to encourage people to make a large purchase. So a very simple thought: add local content, use the benchmarks from Jigmail, because actually they're suggesting there's big gains to be made by a systematic test thinking about localness. That's just one scenario. We have another scenario coming up. Thank you, Mark. And again, it's a pretty obvious one. It's about signposting on your advertising to drive traffic. Nothing kind of fundamental in that, but that kind of good practice in an A/B test should deliver you, again, some interesting results according to Jigmail data. So just putting prominent URL information or using QR codes to connect into digital traffic is likely to have some real benefits. So again, you can look at an example of the content. So use of QR codes has been next. Thank you, Mark. It's kind of much talked about recently. Here's just an example from Uber Eats of using those QR codes in mail. And they are a great way, obviously, to signpost digital traffic. So again, in this scenario, you go back to Jigmail data for your A/B test and use our data to project the outcome from the test. Thank you, Mark. So the benchmark here is suggesting that adding that signposting details will lift people making a purchase by 30% and make it 40% more likely for people to visit your website. So these are quite big numbers, and some of this is just working off some fundamental assumptions and simple assumptions, but we're suggesting there's some kind of big gains to be made there. So again, we're looking to support people using Jigmail to drive their testing approaches. We do have some additional research support for that in terms of whether you want to link it to your tracking studies, whether you want to link it to your creative testing. Again, we have some ways of doing that, so do get into contact with us if you want to develop this more systematically. But just really wanted to illustrate the kind of easy wins from Jigmail in terms of straightforward test and learn that are available. Thank you, Mark. So the final, just the last couple of minutes, in our last sort of webinar releasing the data, we were pleased to show you a new charting tool. So at the kind of early stages of building your acquisition campaigns, looking at the competition, what's happening within your category and so on, is an essential good practice step. And we would encourage you to use Jigmail and our new charting tool to really unlock that insight. So just a couple of examples here of what that tool can give you in terms of outputs. Again, for those who are familiar with it, it's only been available for the last sort of month or so, but you really can, in the matter of seconds, just get your insight out, download your chart, build your case, build your own bespoke analysis. So hopefully the data is much more accessible, much more usable through this charting tool, which is all available through the Discovery portal, which you'll be familiar with if you're a subscriber. So here we're just looking at the kind of supermarkets, the grocers, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Morrison's, Lidl and Co-op, and just looking at their trends over the last 4 years in terms of share of voice, or what we call share of doormat. Obviously Tesco's has dominated, but in a headline way, you can use Jigmail to pick up these other trends. So Lidl seem to have been coming back into mail more recently, less so the likes of Sainsbury's. So, but that's just the kind of starting picture, and you can dig into each one of those lines to get a whole load more insight about your category, about your competition for your clients, to kickstart some of your acquisition planning. I think we've got another illustration, Mark, of some of the other outputs you can get from the tool. So this is just mapping down beyond the exposure measures, these secondary commercial actions across the category. So again, against the same competitive set, or indeed in this case, I'm looking at Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Co-op, I should say, you can see how their mail is working differently across all these commercial actions. Really interesting fundamental insight. And you can see there that, for example, in terms of mail that triggers word of mouth, a really powerful driver of effectiveness, there's dramatically different levels of word of mouth being generated by mail across that competitive set. Morrison's are doing something interesting that's getting talked about. They're also using kind of vouchers incredibly effectively versus arguably some of their competition. So that's just a little kind of illustration and example of the patterns that Jigmail give us, but actually then how we can make that meaningful in terms of our planning across categories for our clients, and to kickstart some of our planning approach. So do go to that charting tool. We're really pleased. We're pleased with it. We hope you are. You can really get data out very easily, very quickly, and please use it. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Mark. I think, and that just really sort of summarizes. There's been a number of takeaways there, but fundamentally, first was basically, I think, the new norms of mail behaviors that we saw in 2020. Each ad impression is working much harder for you at driving a commercial response. That includes online and store visits, as well as the direct own attributed response. It drives this physical and digital effects across the journey. And when you start making comparisons in cost terms on a like-for-like basis using our comparison tool, then actually it does it more cost efficiently than some of the classic digital acquisition channels. And of course, as we all kind of accept, I think test and learn is a good way to go to drive and optimize response. Use Jigmail to kickstart some of your systematic testing and learning, which can be in a very simple, structured way. That's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. That was a great rundown of the latest insights. And I mean, I have to say that sort of the changes in consumer sort of behaviour measured over this extraordinary period of the last 18 months or so, we really wouldn't have had any detailed or decent insight into what was going on if it weren't for Jigmail. It's come into its own, particularly in tracking some of the behavioural trends we've seen. Right, moving on. I'd like to welcome to the Oki Alistair from the Let's Shop group, and he will give us a short presentation on some creative formats, and then hand over to Nigel from Sky, who will put some of these things into practice for you and show you some of the creative work that Sky have been up to lately. Great, so Alistair, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Well, good morning, everybody. So I've got 10 minutes and I've got 8 great formats and one idea which Mark Cross has already blown for me, but my example's gin rather than Uber Eats, so I'm sure we'll all be happy with that and how to make cocktails. So next slide, please, Mark. So what don't you want your formats to be? Well, you don't want them to be the same as everyone else's, and you want them to stand out. And that's what Nigel's going to show you later on, how Sky have done that. Next slide, Mark. What you want them to do is you want them to stand out. You want them to be picked up. You want them to be actioned. Jigmail has shown that, you know, through the door, the doormat is a great place to drive online activity, but you don't want to get lost with everybody else's. You want to stand out, and you want your mail door drop to be actioned. So how do we do that? Next slide. Well, we be creative, and that's what we're all about at Letter Shop. So next slide, and run the video. So rather than try and describe them, we've got some animations here. So the first one is cards and coupons. Well, again, Mark's demonstrated beautifully earlier on that coupons and vouchers drive increased activity both online and in store. And there's some figures from Jigmail. But the great thing is with some of the processes that we use, you can have a tip-on card, so you don't actually damage the product when you take the card off. You can put it in your wallet. It doesn't have to be one, it can be many. So I think the most we've ever done is 6 cards, but here's a great example of 3 different product coupons to take away and use in store. We quite often do recommend a friend, so you'll get a discount and then a recommend a friend. Next slide, please, Mark. Pop-ups. Well, personal favorite. a pretty simple man. So I like a pop-up. Great way of visualizing a product. It gets interactivity, creates a bit of surprise as well, because you're not really expecting it. This one did fantastically. Who doesn't like lion cubs? And we do 3 different types. We do that one, which is a box-shaped pop-up. Top right of the screen, we've got the pop through, which is great for a card or a voucher that you can tear off. And our particularly spooky Halloween one is a pop out, where we double thickness the card, and when you open it, woo, it pops out. So that's pop-ups. Next slide, please, Mark. We're doing a lot better than the previous time. They all froze on us. So sliders are a really nice way of controlling the offer or the message that you want to deliver to a consumer. We do 2 types. We do a locking slider, which basically doesn't slide all the way out. It stays in the piece, or one where you can just pull the pieces out, and they can be a single thickness of paper, a double thickness, or it could be a leaflet, a 6-page or an 8-page leaflet that you pull out. So there's a good example with a window. We do a fantastic one for Sky with a window patch on it, which is really effective as well. Next slide, Mark. The easy mailer. Well, when Partially Addressed first arrived on the scene, we deal with a number of the supermarkets. And when we went and spoke about Partially Addressed, the supermarkets said, well, we like, 4-page, 6-page A4 inserts for our communication of our products. So we designed this product, which gives you the ability to use it as partially addressed, maximize your mail sort discount, primarily because it's sealed on all edges and can be mechanically mailed. We've had some fantastic success with Cost Cutter and Hotter, to name 2, where this format's been worked really well, and you can see with the product, it gives you a nice space to show product in a very simplistic way. Next slide, please. Die cuts. Again, shapes are really important. If you walk along the shelves, particularly in the clothes washing aisle, you see all the shapes, and there's a lot of research going into the shapes. This one here that's being demonstrated for the toilet paper with a koala, who wouldn't pick that up? It's really different. And this one was a die cut for Macmillan, and it's a door hanger to remind you of when the date is, to encourage your friends to come along and host a coffee morning. So again, something memorable, and something that you can hang on to for future. Thank you, Mark. Spinners. These used to be very difficult to get produced. Quite a lot of them were done by hand. We've managed to find a way of using it through paper engineering, so that again, high volume is at a cost-effective price. And a spinner pretty much does what it says on the tin. It spins. So in this case for First Direct, it's moving around to show you different products that you can purchase. We've done it for wine tastings and food, vouchers. So it works for a multitude of sectors. Next slide, Mark. The tumble card, similar to the spinner, again, quite an expensive little product originally, but again, we've automated the way that it's produced. It can be a standalone product, or we can tip it onto a letter, so that you've got an addition to a letter, sort of like a giveaway. And the nice thing about this is that it can lead you through the conversation. So when we're not buffering, we're opening up, you've got your monthly cash payments coming. The next slide, next is cash back. And then through double rewards, and then you'll be back to the beginning again. So, nice nice format, really good way of leading if you want to lead a customer through a journey. Next slide, please, Mark. So fragrances, you know, print's already pretty emotive because it's in your hand, you've got touch and feel. We'll bring fragrance into the equation. So we do fragrances for, we do fine fragrances, we do fragrances for clients like Avon. We do them for clothes washing companies. We're actually doing some fragrance for some COVID trials and testing. But also in the past, we've done that for National Trust for the spring fragrances of Walking Through Flowers. So it's, again, another way of evoking that emotion to get involved and to remember the brand. Next slide, please. And my great idea, which again, Mark has already highlighted, is the simple QR code. Is, you know, taking the consumer from the page into the internet. Now, what we've done here is we've worked with Zappa. So if you click on that barcode, you'll go through to a Sipsmith's website and show you how to make some gin cocktails. But the nice thing about it is we have a number of icons that run around within the online area, and allows us to generate statistics. So you're not actually just going into the you know, the Wild West on the internet and losing your customer. It's in a controlled area, and you can control the journey. So that's my one great idea. And next slide, Mark. So I hope from that you can get some ideas to stand out from the crowd, be innovative, help build the brand, and get people really engaged with the piece that's coming through the letterbox. Next slide. If you want to know anything more, get a sample pack on our website. There's a creative corner which has got lots of videos and dummy ideas. We have a free dummy service that you can use, or a format design service. Get in touch. We're always posting animations on LinkedIn, and yeah, just use your imagination. And I'm going to hand over to Nigel to show how Sky have been creative and delivered some outstanding results. Thank you all.
Thanks, Alistair. Good morning, everyone, and greetings from a very grey, overcast, dingy Weybridge. You know, the last year and a half I've actually been using Zoom mainly for karate classes, so I was quite tempted to put a white karate gi on this morning, but I thought better of it, and I thought put a smart shirt on instead. So good morning to you all. Next slide, please. A little bit of background, so you know who we are. We're Europe's biggest in-house agency, Sky Creative. So we work absolutely through the line, and we work on Europe's leading media and entertainment brand, obviously Sky. So we work across the business: mobile, broadband, TV, cinema, sports, news. And the agency is fully through the lines, as I say. So we work on promo cutting, we do TV spots, there's broadcast design. So all the news backgrounds and sports design that you see, we do. There's digital, out of home, that's another big one for us, print, retail, email, and what I'm going to talk to you about today, direct marketing. Next slide, please. So believe it or not, and people do actually leave Sky, apart from the fact that it's actually awesome. So that's quite surprising. But our job in the agency is to try and get them to stay or compel them to come back. So we target people in two phases. We've got pending cancel and we've got win back. Now, pending cancel is 31 days from the time they tell us they'd like to leave, and win back is over that period. So it might be a couple of months. It could be significantly longer. Next slide, please. So this is the control. It's the current DM. So it's got all the right components. As you can see, there's a headline. We've got the explanatory copy. There's the content panels, which is essentially what you get for your money. There's a prominent offer in the CTA, obviously a staple of good DM, but it just felt a little bit traditional and a little bit expected. So we've also included tiles, content tiles on the reverse, to show that you can personalize the package. But if people are leaving on the basis of price, this could actually make things worse. It could actually build up to make it look as if it's even more expensive. So bottom line, it's functional. It ticks all the right boxes, you know, and it does work. Next slide. But, you know, if you've seen the brilliant Black Panther movie, there's a great quote from Princess Shuri: just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved. And that's the thinking that we've applied to the strategy approach and complete overhaul of our creative. Next slide, please. So this is the stuff we all know and love that comes through our letterbox on a daily basis. So standout's really important. Next slide, please. And I don't know about you guys, but over the last few months, I've got bombarded with flyers from local estate agents telling me how many eager buyers there are from my house. Okay, next one, please. So I thought it'd be useful to show you what we've done before in the last few years. So next slide, please. So this is a missed parcel idea. So it takes that idea, and as you can see, it's heavily branded, but the brightness of the color actually helps it look more authentic, which they're normally red, aren't they? And we've stripped out anything other than the key information. It's all super short and to the point copy. We've had quite a lot of disgruntled people calling us, but interestingly, the conversion rate for these guys was pretty high. So I think the point I'd like to make here is that a bit of bravery and controversy can work in your favor if you get it right. And we knew people were going to call on the basis of that, so we prepped our call center staff to be ready. And the conversion rate was really, really good. So, you know, a bit of bravery can make a big difference. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Now, the next pack we sent out was completely different. So it's unbranded on the outer. There's no Spectrum Sky color. We just used a simple headline and some reverse psychology to create a bit of intrigue. Now, on a 48 sheet, the general rule was to keep the headline under 8 words. And a DL is a very similar format in that respect, in proportion. So that also drove the execution. Next slide, please. So inside, we paid off the headline with the line, but now here's what you're missing. And we included 4 key things. And there was a key art from one of the biggest trending shows to dial up the FOMO. And the layout and content was designed so people could take it all in almost at a glance. So keeping it really, really simple. Next slide, please. Now, we always spend a lot of time working on concepts, and I thought I'd show how we developed one route in particular. And this is a mood board from one of the first ideas. Now, we've seen a lot of takeaway menus come through our letterboxes over the last few months. So we thought, well, you know, how can we piggyback off that insight and subvert the media to promote Sky? Next slide, please. So we picked out the key benefits of Sky and we listed them just like a menu, so starters, mains and desserts. And we started with creative that showed the hardware, but it didn't look authentic enough, so quickly ditched that idea. Next slide, please. So we went portrait, which helped make the DM look more like a menu, but the hardware still got in the way of making it look authentic. Next slide, please. We explored die cuts and even edible paper and ink, which we did with Alistair and the guys, but we just thought it actually looked a little bit gimmicky and undermined the sort of sophistication that we were looking for in this type of menu. Next slide, please. And this is what we went with. Really simple, elegant, lots of white space and concise copy. And the aim was to make it look more like an upmarket restaurant than a dodgy kebab shop. And we worked with our own expert print production team, and as I say, the expert guys at Lat Shop Group to get the best paper stock for the job. Now, I don't know if you can actually see it on here. It looks a little bit blurry to me. But on the starters, Why Hate Susie was one of the key shows. So we've called it a bold, bracing show starring Billie Piper. 8 distinctive servings of drama, Riviera, the glamorous sun-soaked crime thriller, a decadent fusion of Latin, French, and Italian influences. So you can see how we sort of take that language from restaurants and menus and apply it to the content that we wanted to promote. Next slide, please. And that, as I say, is how it turned out. Next slide, please. So are you a winner? We had some ideas which were peel and reveal. Next slide, please. And it was inspired by sort of gamer chance scratch cards. And we just wanted to see how people would respond to a more interactive piece. Now, scratch cards are a pretty unenvironmentally friendly format, hence the peel and reveal format that we went with. And we thought in this instance, using the full sky spectrum color would give us standout, but it just felt a little bit garish, given that these were sort of almost like a scratch card format. So we wanted a more sophisticated look and feel. Next slide, please. So we started looking at TV screens as a device, but they just felt a little bit plonky. So we developed that, next slide please, into a far simpler design. So perforated panels, a little nudge to encourage people to reveal the lines underneath. Okay, next slide please. And hopefully this will work. We've got a short video produced by the guys at the Letter Shop just to show how that all come together. So yeah, we could play the video, great. Okay, let's move on. So code breaker, we've already seen some ideas around the spinners, and that was the idea behind the next concept I want to show you. Cool, right, so here's another concept that invited some interaction. You turn a wheel to reveal the offer. Top left, you can see that we used the Sky Q logo, which we based the initial idea on, but we ditched that in favour of something far simpler. And on the bottom there, again, you can see we looked at the format and how you would turn the wheel from the right-hand side. Next slide, please. We explored different mechanics. So again, you can see there's a little nudge here, so you'd fold out the panel to reveal the wheel that you would turn on the inside. Next slide, please. And the next format, where it was a more portrait format, you turn the wheel at the bottom and then the offer would reveal itself in the window above it with a small nudge to just explain what you need to do. Next slide, please. And that's how it looked. Next slide, please. So another idea was based on the style of a fruit machine, and you'd pull down the panel to reveal the offer in 3 windows, just like you'd won the jackpot. You just wouldn't get a pile of grubby old 2p pieces falling out when you got the 3 jackpot messages. Right, next slide, please. And that's how it turned out. We have another video here. Right, next slide, please. Cool, so we come up with the idea of using a wedding invite over a year ago, but obviously with lockdown, we had to put it on ice. But as soon as the restrictions eased, the packing went into production, and it's proved one of our most successful pieces. Again, I don't think you can read the copy on that. So on the first card, it says, "Dear name, we'd love to have you with us. That's why we're inviting you to come back to Sky for just, and there's a price, for 18 months. It's normally X a month, which means there are plenty of reasons to get the confetti out. So call us on to confirm your attendance, and we look forward to welcoming you." And really simple copy. So again, borrowing that style of a wedding invite. Gifts, you could win plenty of those if you're a Sky VIP. Dress code, formal, informal, black tie and ball gown, jeans and t-shirt, up to you. Dietary requirements, whether you fancy a buffet of live sports or banquet of music, we'll be able to cater for you. So I think just this side of punny, but you'll get the idea. Cool, and the last slide, please. Good, so as you can see, here are the results. So on the Miss Parcel, we had a 41% increase in re-estates. Interestingly, the actually non-branded tease and reveal piece, so an 80% increase in reinstates. 20% on the menu, not entirely sure why that was the case, but we're looking into that. We saw a 178% increase on the peel and reveal, so perhaps indicates that some level of interactivity can make a difference, and 145% increase in reinstates with a wedding invite. Next slide, please. So if I can leave you with a few thoughts, be insight driven, get inside of the mind of the consumer and think what motivates them. Be benefit led. I think the temptation is to tell people what we want to say as opposed to telling them what they like to hear. Be brave, be bold and be different. Be respectful. I think David Ogilvy came up with a famous phrase, the consumer is not a moron, she's your wife. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to remember. Be rewarding, give them a reward when they've opened the pack and to do something with it. Be creative, and above all, be brilliant. And the last slide, please. Make sure we never produce that. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Nigel, Alistair, thank you very much for taking us through that creative showcase. Fantastic to see how these ideas come together, you know, and bravely showing the things you discard along the route to success. Above all, I think just shining a light on the art of the possible, and certainly, you know, the affordability of these formats now with the new print technology. So much of this done in line is amazing, and so those who haven't kind of seen print in action of late or the latest presses, it's well worth looking into, because I think you'll be astonished at what's possible these days. Great show. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Right. And now I'm going to hand the baton over to Jodie from Edit and Karen from the RSPCA. You're going to do a little double act to take us through their latest case study. So welcome, guys. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that, Mark. So as Mark said, myself and Karen are going to be talking to you today about the success of our Christmas campaign that we ran together. So first things first, to set the scene, I'll hand you over to Karen so she can tell you about all the objectives.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jodie, and morning, everyone. So I'll kick off by asking Mark to flip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So GDPR has had a significant impact on the RSPCA and the channels that we focused our recruitment strategy on. We were one of the few charities who very early on decided to take an opt-in approach as a result of GDPR. But the impact of that led to a very obvious decline in our contactable base for future fundraising appeals. So Door Drops had great growth potential. We had reached a high of 7 million in 2017, but with GDPR and our opt-in position, the channel was just not viable anymore. So we moved away from offline to our core face-to-face, online and DRTV channels, where opt-in rates were much more acceptable. However, this still left a significant shortfall in our fundraising audience. So at the time I joined in April 2020, discussions were taking place to move to a legitimate interest position for direct mail and telemarketing in October 2020. Next slide, please, Mark. However, as we all know, lockdown happened in March 2020. Direct debit cancellations were increasing rapidly for us. We were losing more regular donors than the volume we were able to recruit, and we needed to move really quickly. We responded quickly by launching one of the first emergency appeals in the sector. The appeal launched towards the end of March, and it halted the steep decline in net regular givers. Next slide, please. But it wasn't enough. Large-scale events and face-to-face fundraising came to an immediate stop. We needed an alternative that had the scale, reach, and targeting potential as face-to-face, but was agile enough to get up and running in a short space of time. So I put together a proposal to drive up investment in channels that could safely reach potential supporters where they're spending most of their time at home. Next slide, please. The proposal was accepted, and I reached out to Edit. It meant that we could capitalise on our new legitimate interest position and open up the offline channels again, a space that we'd not been in for several years. I was also really keen to test a new channel to the RSPCA, partially addressed mail. It wasn't plain sailing to convince our internal teams, as you can imagine, as the RSPCA has a very cautious approach. In particular, there's a real concern where there's any potential for personal data to be used. But with the support of Edit and their targeting capabilities, we were able to get sign off within a very short time frame. So I'm now going to hand over to Jodie, who will take us through some of the detail. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so that's when the relationship between Edit and RSPCA began. This was obviously a virtual relationship initially, so that obviously had its challenges. We had to sort of adapt to new ways of working with new teams across different channels as well. So all of that had to be considered. We obviously initially first had to discuss the brief and all of the objectives of that. And then secondly, as Karen said, with all the legalities behind GDPR and the fact that we'll be using personal data for direct mail, that will have to be considered as well. So these sort of points that are shown on the slide now, all different things that we had to consider. So coronavirus, did we really want to be mailing people who are still in the tiered system in lockdown, for example? Vulnerability, so thinking of age caps and income caps that we could apply to ensure we're not mailing anybody who is particularly vulnerable. The Scottish SPCA, so ensuring that we didn't have any crossover between the RSPCA and the mailings that they were doing to protect that sort of warm relationship between them. Had to consider existing donors. So of course, the aim of the campaign was to recruit new donors. So where possible, we excluded any of RSPCA's existing donors from the mailings. Particularly, we were able to do this for DM and PAM, where we have the address details of the people that we'll be mailing. And finally, suppression. So this is a standard thing that we apply for direct mail campaigns and partially addressed, where we can screen out anybody who is on any of the relevant registers, such as deceased, gonaways, MPS, all of those standard suppressions. If we move on to the next slide, please. So for Edit, at the heart of everything we do is data. So first things first, we had to consider the targeting. So once the sort of legal aspects are all ironed out, that was the first thing that we did, discover who the RSPCA donor actually was. So using Experian Mosaic, we were able to find out who these audiences were. If we move on to the next one. So we overlaid different things such as TGI statements along with JICMail. So this screenshot here is actually from JICMail. And it shows different typical charity audiences that are often mailed across the board in the charity industry. So there's 3 different classifications. You've got those in the purple box, who are those that are frequently mailed but have a bit of a lower interaction with mail. Those in the blue box that are frequently mailed with a higher interaction, and then those in the red box at the bottom that are less frequently mailed with a high interaction. So this helps us to uncover any hidden audiences that we could potentially mail, and all of this sort of insight shaped our targeting for the campaign. We'll move on to the next slide. So the next thing, once we discovered who those audiences were, we'd sorted out all of the legal aspects of it. It was then looking at which channels we were going to allocate what budget to. So we knew we wanted to run across all three of the channels. Obviously, partially addressed mail was one of the channels that hadn't ever been tested before. So we wanted to be a bit more cautious in the budget that we allocated to this channel. So we allocated 14% of budget here. Door drop, we know that this gives us a large reach. It's also the cheapest channel that we can go down as well. So we allocated 58% of the budget there, so we can get that sort of mass reach to a large audience. And then DM on the other end of the spectrum, being really niche and targeted, and we typically see that DM does tend to have higher response rates in comparison to all channels. So again, the remaining budget, the 28% that was left, was allocated here. We move on to the next one. So the next thing to consider was where we could make efficiencies in print and creative. So it made sense for all of the packs to have the same format and the same creative messaging. This allowed us to not only have efficiencies across the print, because we could print it all together in one with a higher volume, but it also allowed us to have an equal baseline across all of the creatives and all of the channels for when we're measuring performance. To move on to the next slide, please. So this was the creative that we went out with. So we had an outer envelope, BRE, donation form and letter. As I said, this was consistent across all of the channels. The only thing that was different was the personalization. So for door drop, there wasn't any, as that's at the poster sector level. Partially addressed mail, we had the address level data, so we were able to laser the addresses on. And for direct mail, we had the names and addresses, so we were able to laser that information on as well. When we did this, we were sure to make sure we did use lasering and black plate changes where possible to keep the costs down as much as we could. Can we move on to the next one, please? So then the final sort of thing for us to consider in our planning was integrating all of the channels that we were using. So any other thing that was going out at the same time, so TV, digital, anything like that, we made sure that it was all aligning with the messaging that we had, making sure that the timing, everything went out at around the same time, and that above the line media went out before the direct response media with the letterbox campaigns that we were going out with to create a halo effect. We move on to the next one. Finally, attribution. So once the campaign was done, once it had all gone out, the next thing to do was make sure that we were attributing the responses correctly. So the way that we do that is through an address level matchback. So what we tend to do is gather all of the data of any responders that had come through during that time period, and this allowed us then to map accurately anybody who responded through all sorts of different channels back to the mailing. So for those more tech savvy people who might be responding online from seeing the mailing, we're able to attribute that response to the mailing, so we have that accurate attribution. We move on to the next one. So what did the data show us? So the campaign went live in November, and we were still actually seeing responses coming through into March. So a really good, successful campaign. I'll hand you over to Karen just to give you a bit more detail on that.
Thanks, Jodie. Mark, could you go back to the other slide, please? Lovely, thank you. We are running out of time, so we'll be really quick. So just to say that, as you can see, it was a resounding success. The overall integrated campaign brought in 65% more income at Christmas than the highest income generating Christmas appeal at the RSPCA to date. The acquisition element finished at a year one ROI of 101, so it was just over break even. We expect the overall campaign income to double within the next 3 years due to the regular givers recruited off the back of this appeal. We're also very pleased with our January campaign. It exceeded its targets. We recruited double the number of donors we'd forecast and had a 147% increase in revenue versus target. Thank you. Over to Josie. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so if we just click along, Mark, they'll all load up. But so here are some of the key KPIs of the results of the campaign. So as you can see, generally across the board, a resounding success across all of the different KPIs that we measured on. We so looking at all of sort of the highlights, again, these are all sort of in comparison to the forecasts that we'd provided, but just to sort of say those forecasts that we did provide, as Karen said, there was quite a big gap to fill from her perspective, and in order to sort of get this over the line internally, we had to be quite bold with our forecasts. So the fact that we, you know, over delivered across the board was even more amazing. If we move on to the next slide. So as Karen touched on, the January campaign was also a massive success. So we went out with another DM mailing in January due to the success that we were seeing for Christmas, and the winter campaign, again, you know, brilliant performance, double the forecast donors, 25% increase in average donation value, 147% increase in revenue. So if we move on to the next slide. Of course, it doesn't stop there. So once we've sort of got the initial results through, we then look at the data, which will inform our decisions for future campaigns, such as our summer appeal that went out. If we move on to the next slide. So here are some of the key outtakes split by each of the different channels that we could see in the data. So door drop, half of the responders came via the web. So we actually noticed that in comparison to the other channels, there was a bit of a younger, more tech-savvy audience here. A potential untapped audience in some of the lower deciles, we noticed that performance of between the deciles was minimal. So we then have the exploration to go sort of down the model a bit further. Direct mails tended to produce the higher average donation values, and this channel had the oldest donors. The majority of PAM responders were cash, which is unsurprising as that was the key ask on the mailing. However, this was slightly lower in comparison to the other channels of the number of regular givers that we had through. And we also had a similar trend to door drop here with a slightly younger audience. We move on to the next slide. So then sort of on from that, what recommendations were made? So optimizing our targeting. So for door drop, DM and PAM, we now have these individual data sets that we could feed into each of these individual models to enhance them further. We'd also potentially test further down the door drop model to that untapped audience. Creator tailoring, so adapting donation levels is something that we're looking to test. And for summer, something we implemented was adding in the QR code and the Alexa leaflet. And these both came off of the back of that new tech-savvy audience that we found. And we thought it would be a good idea to test this and see whether we could actually drive even more responders online from that, because we know that audience typically already responds online anyway. And then guiding the donor. So with some of the older donors that we saw come through for DM, for example, wanting to make the copy as clear and readable as possible. So we suggested increasing size of fonts and other things like that. And including more detail around regular giving to try and enhance people to regular give rather than just give that one-off cash donation. So we move on to the next slide. So yeah, and finally, that's kind of the loop that we tend to work in. So it's not a linear process. It's all about testing, learning and optimizing. So that is what we will continue to do, working together and hopefully more and more successful campaigns. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Jodie, Karen, thank you so much for telling that story. It's wonderful to see a client coming back into the channel and finding such great success. And for me personally, I'm delighted it's the RSPCA. As a callow youth, I was originally, when I first joined Whistle back in the day, I was actually account director for RSPCA and spent many a happy hour down with the team at that time in Horsham. So really pleased to see you back and see it all working so well. Okay, I'd now like to introduce me. So you're with me for the next couple of minutes as I romp through a bit more about the sort of planning side of things and how to sort of optimize the sort of channel. So I've introduced myself already, so you know who I am, but just in terms of Whistle, just so you know, we have a sort of unique portfolio of businesses across a number of different areas and work in a lot of sort of complementary spaces to those which we've sort of talked about. Mail, obviously market leader from a downstream access perspective, represented by both the Whistle and the Post Hub brands. Parcels, increasing growth strategy, obviously with e-commerce booming, again under the Whistle and also the Parcel Hub brand. And then from a e-commerce fulfillment perspective, delivering solutions to e-commerce advertisers under both the Whistle and the client-based brand, and that offering also includes contact center. And then what I look after is obviously the door drop side, again under the Whistle brand, but also under the leaflet drop brand, our local self-serve online platform. So that's what Whistle offer. Now the obvious observation, and it's been sort of writ large, I think, in both Jodie and Karen's presentation, but also from Mark at the start from Jigmail, is that we have lived through an unprecedented moment, particularly in the media context. It's been an extraordinary time, and it's a moment where you reflect on it, sort of where suddenly the norms of what you take for granted, that media plan you wrote 18 months ago, suddenly has to change, has to flip overnight, in a way that you could never have predicted. But certainly, we've seen huge impacts on all marketing channels over the last 18 months. We've certainly seen out of home, commuter press, cinemas, events, all of that stuff been sort of massively impacted. And while perhaps intuitively you'd feel this has been a good time for sort of digital brands, in reality it's been a rather a mixed fortunes, and certainly obviously in 2020 we saw some very high profile concerns being raised, and boycotts indeed from major advertisers of some of the digital channels. So I mean, for me, and again written in the evidence from Jigmail, media context of the pandemic has definitely been the home. It's been great for television, it's been great for digital, but great for direct marketing too. Our mad, crazy homes that became simultaneously our schools, our offices, our restaurants, our entire epicenter. Suddenly, everything revolved around that, and media that could penetrate that bubble, could get inside there, obviously has a great chance of working well. So where do our channels sit? Well, they're unique channels, store drop and partially addressed, really. They're targeted, but they're broadcast. They go to everybody in your targeted area, but they are indeed targeted using data, albeit sort of relevant, anonymized, privacy compliant data. So we sit somewhere between broadcast and the one-to-one. And just as Jodie said, in terms of the flighting of your campaign, if you are thinking about integrating these channels into your marketing mix, then this is where you'd put it, somewhere between the broadcast, where you use your above the line to kind of generate awareness of your proposition. Then your door drop can hit home with, or your partially addressed can hit home with that call to action that drives that sort of first engagement, hopefully registering that data, giving that permission to continue the journey then through one-to-one channels. So that's very much where we sit in the sort of media spectrum. However, there's a huge opportunity blooming at the moment for these channels, and I think some smart advertisers are not being slow to realize this opportunity. We are by design GDPR compliant. We target households rather than people. We use postcodes which are anonymized and represent on average 15 households. This enables us to have this and to get this sanction from the ICO that basically the GDPR rules do not apply. And they will remain opt-out post-GDPR, post new regulations coming through from Brussels, e-privacy regulations, which the UK will have to at least mirror and adopt to be able to trade with Europe. And with the recent announcements, albeit deferred now, about the retirement of third-party cookies and Apple putting its privacy first, sort of just to stop sort of unwarranted tracking across mobile app usage, the sort of paucity of usable data actually means that these channels that can navigate that sort of those kind of cliffs can actually come to the fore and should be really considered as part of somebody's sort of marketing mix, particularly for that top of funnel first acquisition. The smart advertisers have realized that, in spite of the fact that obviously we've lived through a period of enormous, extraordinary digital growth, notwithstanding the pandemic. Door drop media is actually the only print channel to have shown any kind of growth in media investment over this sort of time period. I mean, the pandemic, as I say, will change that slightly, but that's a momentary blip, we are confident. So when we look at the sort of levels of investment, okay, that rise is probably mostly inflationary, but we've been steady as you go compared to those double-digit decreases in direct mail, in newspaper advertising, in magazine advertising, which of course is where the internet has largely sort of moved in and taken share. But we come back to something, echoing again what Jodie said. It's about scale, it's about efficiency, and it's about scale. And this is an example, a different charity client, but a good example of demonstrating how door drops can resonate and can succeed on a variety of different metrics. You know, return on investment is a key one, of course, although lifetime value is probably even more important. I think the charities realise that. In this example, in spite of obviously a very significant level of media investment, the door drop delivered a positive ROI, 1.2 for every pound spent. That's a short-term ROI measured sort of 6 to 8 weeks after the campaign had finished. It did a staggering job of delivering 82% of the value of donations from only 66% of the sort of budget spent. So we're in that sweet spot, that balance between effective marketing and delivered at scale. Other channels might outperform, you know, if they're with lower levels of investment, with more targeting, but DoorDrop balances that sort of the two peaks. So if you need scale and positive ROI, then it's a channel to look to. And as I say, I mean, you know, not to sort of dwell on it, but there have been, and there continue to be, ongoing concerns about sort of the impacts of digital on society, on consumers, you know, on brands. So the brand trust issue, obviously writ large, fraud grows and grows and grows. The data, the ethical stance around data, you know, obviously is concerning. Just the lack of trust and transparency that you have on this. That you know, can you believe what you're reading? And I think, you know, 2020 was a very pivotal year for that with coronavirus and all the myths and very unhelpful sort of conspiracy theories swirling around. And also, of course, you know, the sort of the political agenda, the way that was influenced, the Capitol Hill riots, you know, and then the sort of controversy with Australia, and also above all this transparency about measurement, these walled gardens that still exist. You know, these channels tell you how great they are, but you don't have any independent way of checking that. So, you know, there are a number of concerns, undoubtedly rightly being kind of looked at. Hasn't stopped them grow. They're growing, and they continue to grow, and more money is spent on that. But regulation is hard on their heels, both self-regulation from internally with things like the diminishment of third-party cookies, and as say Apple's new privacy-first approach, but also external with e-privacy, and nation states getting kind of concerned about the role and the power of these tech giants. And sometimes it's hard to think, but sometimes things move backwards. Sometimes the things that were possible, that were enabled by technology in the past, are no longer possible now. And it's obviously a vivid example, but I would sort of make the point that I think a lot of the behaviors that people have become normalized to and in the digital marketing space are possible because because you can do, not because you should do them. So sometimes we've lost the consumer and the human in that. We've treated people like commodities, like bits of data, and run roughshod over their permissions and their privacy. And indeed, you know, I'm not the only one to think this. Peter Field, one of the foremost proponents of marketing effectiveness, believes this too, being overhyped and oversold on a uniquely digital future. And I think that's where I do get concerned, is when it's sort of progress with a capital P, and because of that, you're supposed to sort of forgive all of its many sort of vices and ills and behaviors. I mean, for me, it's a stroppy adolescent that's sort of, you know, growing pains and teething troubles and all the rest of it. So it's dazzled, it's come out of the sort of kindergarten sort of, and everyone's sort of fallen in love with it. But, you know, there are some problems. You know, we can't hide away from the fact there are some deep-rooted problems here, and not least about sort of the attribution part of what's actually driving your effectiveness. You know, because the foil is always what we see before, and Mark has obviously explained how Gmail can now support on this. But you know, there's this sense of, well, it's so much cheaper. You know, the cost is a barrier. The cost of print, the cost of distribution. These are expensive things. They're reassuringly expensive. They're expensive for a reason, because they're real and they work. So, just a comparator. I mean, Facebook itself tells you that their sort of attention span for an ad in their news feed is 1.7 seconds on average. That is what we see. Jigmail, of course, tell us that the attention span for a door drop on average is 6.9 days. So it's hard to compare. Print is 20 times more expensive than that Facebook ad. But we're offering, first of all, more space, more content for that value, and obviously that longevity, more opportunities to see and take action. So, I think Jigmail and other sort of bits of analysis are enabling us to really demonstrate sort of the value piece that sits in print. And if you look at actually how Facebook performed during lockdown, actually the stats aren't great. Again, from the Kite Factory, this is amalgamated data, but if you look at it across the piece, the response tracker shows that before the pandemic, their baseline sort of, they didn't achieve it for the sort of 6 months into sort of lockdown, whether that's digital fatigue, burnout, too much Zoom, whatever it is. I don't know, but certainly impacts were lower. And actually, we saw the opposite, as again has already been reported. Door drop performance during lockdown went through the roof. Best ever campaigns, best ever performance. Some great results. And these experiences, not just from the existing and the tried and tested who knew door drop, loved door drop, and always used door drop, but actually from an awful lot of brand new brands who returned to the channel and started using door drops, and indeed had their first tests in partially addressed mail as well, because other options, as I said at the start, were diminished, were not available to them at a particular time. So that inertia was broken by not having your usual menu, your usual choice on the media plan, and people turn to find new ideas and new ways, and sometimes those new ideas are tried and tested, reinvented ones. But I'm not here to pillory digital media. It's about working together, and I think this is the point. This is how this is an example from actually emerging from lockdown. This is a brand that had turned off all of its advertising, literally gone dark, done nothing for the whole of that first quarter, Q2 last year. And when they reopened tentatively, inevitably, and obviously and rightly with PPC and social, started bringing the leads in, just generally kind of getting ready for reopening. But if you look at week 4, which is when the door drop first hit, in comparison to the previous weeks and in collaboration with those other channels, that's where you really saw things take off, boom, the rocket goes off, and that's the sort of impact of all of those media working together. So definitely for those people who are live in digital, and even if your digital strategy is performing, or you believe it's performing, or you're being told it's performing, it'd be very interesting to throw some print media into the mix, because I think you'll see it work even harder. Of course, the environment sits there. It's something that, of course, that is more front of mind now post-pandemic than ever before. But we've got a great story to tell here. Whistle and Edit, big key supporters of Two Sides as an organisation, which serves to set the record straight. We're also supporting the Ad Net Zero initiative. The environment should not be a reason. It's misinformation to sort of say, we're kind of cutting down rainforests, and everything is sustainable, everything is there. And the digital footprint in terms of carbon is not great. The sort of server rooms of Google obviously have a massive footprint. So there's everything it has. The inconvenient truth is everything has a footprint. It's just actually the print and paper and pulp industry is doing a very good job of dealing with theirs. And there'll be more news and announcements around new carbon neutral initiatives for next year. So in the midst of all of this as well, of course, we've had the benefit of partially addressed mail arriving. Post-GDPR, a product built around trying to offer solutions for those in mail, for those people who could no longer rely on the lists that they've used before, or who perhaps haven't quite got their heads around legitimate interest, as Cameron was explaining for the RSPCA. So it took some time for people to settle, but this is a new opportunity and one that works really well. We've seen great success with this from many brands. This is enabling you to target like a door drop, but at a much more sort of granular level. So for us, it's a great product because, of course, it allows us to leverage all of our market-leading intelligence in terms of postcode level targeting with the operational excellence of what we do in the DM space. So it is a sweet spot for us. The key, though, is understanding what it is you can do to unlock the postcode, how you can get insight from anonymized data. And for most people sitting on massive databases, they perhaps haven't, they know what to do with it from a DM or one-to-one perspective. But when suddenly that gets challenged, when suddenly the GDPR laws came in, people sort of froze, found they couldn't use the data. Well, the fact is they were sitting on a goldmine of insight, could help drive their acquisition. by just taking all of the PII away and leaving only those anonymized pieces, which we use so often to sort of to drive insight. Using tools like Mosaic, but also a lot of raw data to help build targeting models that are both predictive and perform. So, the point is that actually tools like geodemographics take away the need for cold lists. If you can't use cold DM anymore, then you can actually, identify audiences and locate them, geolocate them. This is Bournemouth, full of old people. You don't need experience tools and the investment we make in it to tell you that. But actually, if you look at where those households are and how they cluster, you can see why DoorDrop would be a great solution for some of these households. All those silver dots clustered together, almost every single house, in that area would be a senior security type. That's an affluent, cash-rich, equity-rich type, a very attractive audience, and almost every house in those streets would be of that type. So very effective at reaching and cutting through to that audience. But smaller areas, more discrete areas, perhaps would benefit from partially addressed. So the little cluster of brown dots is another older type, vintage value, but very different in terms of its makeup. So if you only wanted to talk to the more hard-pressed and older community, then partially addressed could help deal with that those few streets, that piece of geography. So it's more granular, delivering at postcode level, 15 household level, rather than postcode sector level at 2,500 household level. Our approach applied equally across DoorDrops and across partially addressed mail is to start with understanding those audiences, understanding where they are, who they are, and where they are, the two key elements of postcode planning, integrating with other channels, but then learning and applying learnings from your campaign. So the data feed at the start that you've used for targeting is reiterated and repeated at the back end after the campaign to see what the data tells us. And do we test the hypotheses? Do we prove the hypotheses we started with, or do we have to tweak things? Do we have to change things and evolve things? We're at the start of the journey still. It's a relatively new product, partially addressed mail, but we know that we can drive continuous improvement. Campaign on campaign, month on month, we should be looking to get better and better and better at what we do. So this iterative process, the test and learn process that Mark was outlining at the start, is absolutely what's driving success in this channel. And as you can see from some of these advertisers, they were seeing some of their best results in 2020 and into 2021. Because we believe those channels can work very well together. It shouldn't be an either or. It should be about understanding what the opportunity is. What does the data tell you? And then you can be agnostic about which channel you use. In the areas on the left-hand side map, you can see this is a postcode model applied to Hampstead, and it's the bottom of the model. These areas are poor from a DoorDrop targeting perspective, and we would not be troubling the inhabitants of Hampstead with a DoorDrop. However, if you apply the lens of postcode level for a partially addressed campaign, you can see even in the bluest of areas, there are these little pockets, these streets, these little clusters, which are actually to the top of the channel, of the decile model, of the targeting model. That enables us to be able to just carve off those little elements of geography and speak to them, making the channel more effective. When we look at them together, we can see that this is exactly how it works in practice. So this is a case study from Blind Veterans, which was done in conjunction with the team at Edit. Delighted to show, first of all, that partially addressed performed against their historic cold DM. So actually from a cost per acquisition perspective, that saving on the postage with the partially addressed product was able to offset against a sort of slight dip in response rate. So that was great news. So it was more cost effective in terms of the cold DM. But when you look at the DoorDrop working at the top of the targeting model, that was yet again more cost effective. Again, the lower media cost of a DoorDrop means that it was the most effective channel at the top of a targeting model. So you can use DoorDrop in your high penetrated areas and then use partially addressed mail to still seek opportunity further down your schedule. And that's just my little summary of what's going on in our channel and a bit of a how-to guide in terms of getting into it. But of course, all of us on this webinar are here as your experts. So we hope that you'll reach out to us afterwards if you're interested in taking the conversation further. Thank you very much indeed. And now, to bring it all together and wrap it together in terms of the wider media, I'm delighted to welcome Ben from Edit, Ben Briggs, Media Director of Edit, who's going to, as I say, put all of this into a wider media context.
Thank you, Mark. Virtual good morning to everyone. As Mark said, I'm Ben, the Media Director at Edit, and I'm delighted to be speaking to you this morning. So let's dive straight in. Next slide, please, Mark. So I'm going to, back one, sorry. Thank you. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so just talking around integration, what it is, why we integrate, some top tips, and then some use cases. But before we start, I want to zoom out a little bit. Next slide, please, Mark. So what is an integrated campaign? Google tells us that an integrated media campaign is a blueprint for a marketing campaign. Sounds easy, right? We're all marketers. We're trained in the craft. We have experience. We've done lots of them. Next slide, please, Mark. And when looking through a customer lens, 90% expect consistent interactions across channels. Next slide, please. And from a brand perspective, 87% of retailers agree that an omni-channel marketing strategy is critical to their success. Next slide, please. So why, when we're trained in the craft, customers expect it and brands want it, can we still get it so wrong? There's a number of reasons for this. So starting with internal siloing within brands, customer teams with a specific product focus within their roles, who have differing channel responsibility and targets. They also have conflicting objectives, and sometimes incorrect measurements. They're targeted with different KPIs, inconsistent measurement techniques, lack of measurement on business impact, only measuring what they can see, as Mark Cross highlighted earlier. And there's also things like internal disjointments with online and offline marketing teams not aligned. Next slide, please. So let's move on and look at why we integrate and why you may be looking to create an integrated campaign. You need to first consider what are your goals and can you achieve them without integrating? Do you need to? Are you doing it because everyone else is, because it's popular amongst your competitors? Only integrate if it's absolutely necessary. Next slide, please, Mark. And here are some of the reasons you might consider creating an integrated campaign. Some considerations from, do you want to grow brand awareness and amplify your brand message? You might want to test a new proposition, new channels, refine an existing proposition, improve your results or create more sales or recruit new donors, optimize your budgets if you've seen a dip in performance when testing one channel alone, and to reach new and different growth audiences if your new customer recruitment has stagnated. Next slide, please, Mark. And the most important element by far when integrating though, it has to create more of a connection between your brand and consumer than it would on its own. Otherwise you're wasting money and resource. Next slide, please. Much like the examples Nigel showed earlier for Sky, integration can take many different forms. And at Edit, we constantly push the boundaries of what's possible through the clever integration of data and technology. And as a result, we've brought direct mail into the digital world. We're the world's first with our signal packs. Next slide, please. We reimagined the test drive booking process for Jaguar Land Rover and created a pack that by pressing a replica Evoque button in the pack, the recipient was able to book a test drive with a single push of a button. The technology allowed us to connect the ignition button to our CRM system that in turn delivered a test drive request to the recipient's local Land Rover dealer. This then triggered an SMS and an email to the recipient confirming the booking and that a retailer would be in touch. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, requiring no sign-ups, pre-interaction, Bluetooth, tethering or Wi-Fi. All that, and it delivered amazing results. 44% response rate, a 48-to-1 ROI, and a 10% conversion rate. And next slide, please, Mark. And it won awards as well. 4 DMAs in 2019, 1 in 2020, and the best use of technology in CRM Campaign Tech Awards. Next slide, please. So how do you integrate? Next slide, please. So before we get to the good stuff, as I mentioned earlier, it's easy to get wrong and it can be done badly. Next slide, please, Mark. If you use reach and frequency in silo, you'd only ever use TV, out of home and radio based on this data from the IPA, wouldn't you? And although reach and frequency is a much used methodology and the likes of JICMail, as Mark Cross highlighted earlier, have been developed to give mail more of a look in at the budgeting table, reach and frequency alone is quite an archaic way of planning, isn't it? It doesn't really consider things like cost, performance, vertical sector, role of the media channel, or seasonality, which are all fundamental building blocks for a good campaign. And based on this, print media wouldn't get a look in, would it? You probably wouldn't ever use mail when planning on reach and frequency in silo. Next slide, please. And this is a common process across most network media agencies. And when you look at this, it's easy to understand why so much budget is allocated to broadcast when you look at this model. Network agencies have share deals in place with sales houses, and a lot of negotiations on the cost per thousand is done way ahead of agencies winning new clients and are based on the value of revenue they will place with them across the year, meaning TV CPTs are driven down, hence why broadcast and TV are often the go-to test to fulfill these commitments. And investing so heavily in broadcast with low cost per thousand, given access to higher audience reach, drives up increased search demand in both brand generic and down the cost per click in those media channels, which then creates an irresistible investment combination, which drives a lower attributed cost per acquisition. And on that basis, you can see why traditional direct response media doesn't always get a fair seat at the table, especially when the next generation of media planners are being taught in this manner as well. Next slide, please. And each channel has their own pros and cons, which you can't forget. But when integrating, it's important to realize that it's not about one or the other, but how they work together to create a positive impact on performance and deliver against business metrics. And you have to measure from an integrated perspective, not in silo. Next slide, please, Mark. And you also need to understand what levers to pull and what the resulting pushes will be from a channel perspective. And this slide shows some insights based on data we've taken from a variety of sources. Next slide, please. And to my point a couple of slides ago, here is an example of how TV, direct mail, and door drop work in harmony to deliver extended audience size, gross rating points, or the percentage of audience size you'll be hitting, and the average frequency you're hitting that audience. Integration at its finest. Next slide, please. And as well as hitting your trading audience, there are generally two main options you can use to extend or integrate campaigns. Firstly, finding commonalities in the audience across the channels you're looking at. And secondly, using the humble postcode and using geography to build out the integrated campaigns. Next slide, please. And there are a wealth of considerations to make when looking to build an integrated campaign, and understanding the connection point is critical in addition to understanding the role you want each channel to play. Do you want to build volume or enhance your reach through inserts or door drop? Or do you want to be very specific and focus on granularity using something like direct mail, which has seen a huge resurgence as a viable acquisition channel in the last 18 months? And an essential point on this is there must be alignment. Alignment on creative, messaging, user experience across all platforms. These are all key in driving success. And in the example that Jodie and Karen gave earlier, RSPCA aligned all creative across channels, all online and offline, which was another key success driver for them. Next slide, please. And I want to briefly touch on how we do it differently at Edit. Next slide, please, Mark. And as Jodie talked about earlier, we unlock audiences combining data and insight, and then find audiences within other channels and connect them together to create precision integration and extend the reach of campaigns. And within our team, we operate all media channels within the team, with no silos, which could reduce how effective a cross-channel strategy performs, which can sometimes be hampered when multiple agencies have differing strategies and are also competing for the same budget. And this approach drives value through finding the audiences that matters, reduce wastage on spend, and enhances customer experience throughout the entire customer journey. Next slide, please. And it's a careful balancing act when looking at delivering against business objectives. You, of course, have to carefully balance multiple seesaws across the campaign. And even within the media element alone, you've got a number of seesaws to balance. And you need to consider things like whether you want to focus on brand versus direct response, the cost of the item, broad versus niche targeting, and performance. Next slide, please. And you must also decide on the channels, the right channels to press to find the right consumers' buttons in the moments that matter. Zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Look at the entire customer journey. Ask the data. Make decisions based on evidence. Don't replicate targeting models that might be broken to start with. And prioritize what matters most. Do fewer, higher value things. Simplicity is key. Next slide, please. As we showed earlier, integration doesn't just stop at a channel level. It must be carried through to strategy and execution. And this example from Nuffield Health, where they challenged us to create a direct mail campaign to recruit new members after the Christmas period with a free trial offer. As well as planning and buying a campaign, we developed a postal direct mail template utilising digital mapping and personalisation. We targeted relevant prospects using a combination of socio-demographic selections, as well as using postcode data within a 30-mile circumference of each site. And from there, we created a visual running route, activating this through digital print, directing them to their nearest Nuffield gym, tempting them to burn off a post-Christmas indulgence with a running route to their local gym. Next slide, please. Another example was with Golden Charter. They were facing a declining response rate whilst their cost per inquiry is increasing due to pressure from their competitor set. We recommended Golden Charter tests using partially addressed mail in order to boost the response rate and to reduce this cost per inquiry. And the results were brilliant. We achieved an 11% cost per inquiry reduction and drove a 403% uplift when comparing it against channels they previously used. And the more interesting element was looking at the results as part of the integrating campaign. There were 3 key takeouts from this. Having PAM in the multi-channel mix delivered a 51% uplift on the other media channels that were used, including TV, inserts, and digital media. As part of the integrated campaign, we reduced the overall cost per lead by 32%, or cost per inquiry, sorry. And it allowed us to test a new channel, which we could use to target previously underperforming geographic regions due to the nature of the media channel we were using with partially addressed mail. Next slide, please. And the final case study from us is Shepherd's Friendly approached us with a brief to review their acquisition strategy and drive growth for their adult ISA product. And to meet the challenge, we created a multi-channel campaign to drive the highest possible levels of response across media. Combining response history and geodemographic data, we created a propensity model for partially addressed mail, which would improve conversion and deliver more effective targeting. This would then be followed up with inserts, social media, and programmatic display. And as you'll see from the results on screen, by measuring response holistically, we were able to understand the roles of offline and online played in driving incremental sales of their ISA products. And the first tranche of results showed the partially addressed mailing campaign contributed to increases in key metrics in online. Next slide, please. And just to finish off, launching an integrated campaign is great, but why bother if you're not going to measure it properly or implement any learnings? We've seen it time and again with campaigns that have been run, learnings not evaluated or qualified, or only very narrow metrics used and reported on, rather than ones that have business impact. Next slide, please, Mark. Measurement and doing it correctly, more to the point, has been one of the most debated subjects in marketing over the last few years, having been made more complex by the rise in number of data sources available. And as I mentioned, too often marketers are measuring what is easily accessible, not what really matters to the business. Making measurement meaningful is one of the first projects we've tackled as part of the DMA's Media Councils, which explores 6 key challenges that inhibit meaningful measurement. And this has been hotly followed up by the creation of the DMA's Intelligent Marketing Data Bank, which is put together to show the evolution of marketing effectiveness using data from historical award entries at the DMAs. And you'll be able to access this by clicking on the front cover when you receive this presentation. Next slide, please, Mark. That's it from me today on integration. I hope that's given you some things to think about. Any questions, my details are attached. Thank you very much for your time today and for listening, and back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. As always, a great sort of overview of it, and so important for us to sort of, while we obviously advocate for the channels in particular, it's important to know how they're all going to knit together and how to make them knit together. And sometimes that is the mystery, the magic dust that's needed to make these things all work and everything kind of align. So really good to have that as part of this presentation. So now I am delighted to introduce Andy from Hurdle and his client Jamie from Wheezy, who are going to talk about how print has impacted their online business. So over to you guys.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's actually Jamie here. I'm going to kick off this presentation. It's good to be here. Very happy to talk about roller door drops at an e-commerce business like Wheezy. I hope my connection's okay. I'm actually in a COVID hotspot with 4 out of 5 of us with COVID. I'm the lucky one, I'm negative, but I've got a number of kids who are currently homeschooling and hammering the internet connection here. But look, my background, actually, I've been in, worked for a number of e-commerce brands over the last 20 years, worked for Love Film, I worked for Zoopla, I've been a CMO or a marketing consultant at a number of e-commerce brands. Got a bit of a soft spot for this channel, and mail in particular. I started my career back at The Economist at the end of the last century, so quite a number of years in this space. I'm going to talk about like strategy at Wheezy and where Door Drops fits in, and then Andy's going to take over and talk through some of the details about how he as an agency came in to help us. I'm not, for reasons of sort of competitive natures, I'm not going to go into you know, a huge amount of detail around performance and give away statistics. But what I can say is this is a phenomenally powerful channel for us. We're a well-funded business, and we are across pretty much any channel, every channel you can think of in trying to drive new business for Wheezy. Digital, offline, above the line, below the line, you name it. And we're very lucky in that we've probably got a dozen channels that work very well for us. So we're not reliant on 1 or 2 channels. And amongst those, there are probably 2 channels that stand out, and it's Door Drops and referrals, both of which incredibly powerful, reliable, drive huge numbers, and very affordable for us. You know, there are businesses I've worked in that have been reliant on Google, for example. When I was at Zoopla, heavily reliant on Google. I've been at businesses that have been very, very heavily reliant on Facebook. We're not in that space, which is great. So next slide, please. What is Wheezy? We're an on-demand grocer. Depending on where you live, you may or may not be aware of the huge proliferation of on-demand grocers operating in city centres across the UK, but across the world now. This is a huge global phenomenon with huge amounts of investment going into it. Billions is being pumped into businesses across the world. It's a very, very hot, very, very competitive sector. It's looking to disrupt an industry of grocery shopping, which has been addressed by meal delivery services to some degree in terms of people's food and grocery spend, or meal kits or whatever. But the full grocery aspect is an area that is still inconvenient. If you think about having to book a slot with an online supermarket, it's still the next day. There are a huge number of use cases where this new model fits in. If you assume that you could be a busy young professional family who are our target market, you need a top up, but you've got the kids, and getting them out of the house is a bit of a nightmare. It's chucking down with rain. Guests are about to arrive, for example. You know, you just can't face the trip, or just simply for the convenience. There are a huge number of use cases in which this particular new niche fits in. And the way that we see it is that it's also addressing the nature of the week job. There's actually a large proportion of people, young professionals in particular, who are they're basically grocery shopping by the seat of their pants anyway. They're using convenience shops, but I'll give you a number of examples a minute ago as to why even sort of nipping to Co-op or a local supermarket doesn't satisfy your needs in terms of them having the range of groceries for you. We run adverts that sort of say, look, on Monday you don't know what you want for dinner on Thursday, and we're saying don't weekly shop, whenever you shop. Most of the brands in our space, and it's very competitive, they're focusing very much on cravings, they're focusing on essentials, they're focusing purely on the speed, whereas as a brand, we're very much positioning ourselves as the modern local grocer. We're a grocery first and foremost, powered by tech, whereas the other businesses in our space are typically tech businesses that do groceries, and this is key to us and how we market, and also where direct mail fits in. So next slide, please. How does Wheezy work, right? This is sort of important before we talk about how Door Drop plays a role, right? So you order your groceries via an app, right? We've got a couple of thousand products. We don't compete with Ocado for a range of goods here. We don't have 50,000 products. We don't have 20 different versions of deodorant or whatever. That's not the goal here. We're a curated list. We have quality brands. So we have, when we talk about quality, we're always trying to lean towards you know, the sort of the more independent and artisan brands where possible, but we will also stock Coke and Heinz and Hellmann's because we recognize that these are just the great brands that people love. So we have a high range of quality brands that are familiar to people. Where we differentiate from the likes of Kpis, we've got a huge amount of local produce as well. So local produce comes from your local greengrocer, it's coming from your local baker, it's coming from your local butcher. And so this saves you having to basically go around as part of your repertoire of maybe a weekly shop with a planned top up of having to go around a number of local independents, but we support these locals. So we integrate into the community. We're not necessarily stealing from the community. That's not the intention. So we've got some great local butchers, bakers and greengrocers that we serve. We operate out of dark stores. Now you've heard of dark kitchens that are, kitchens that don't have they're effectively restaurants without, you visiting. Well, we have effectively shops that you don't visit. We've got these sort of small stores that are mini warehouses that operate in like old railway arches, for example, in and around city centres. And it's within there that we have all of our stock. We're buying from wholesalers or obviously having deliveries from these local producers that are then in stores. And then we have customer delivery reps who are, we have the pickers and the packers, and we have the customer delivery reps who are picking your groceries up and delivering it to you within 15 minutes. These are our employees. We're not a gig economy employer. They are on pensions, they're on full salaries. And the technology is such that we can even deliver to a what 3 words address is an example from our PR of that integration, where we were able to deliver to somebody who sat on a boat on the River Thames. We are very much at the forefront. We are well over a third of our customers are people who are typically shopping online. Now that is 3 times the average. You know, it's still, online shopping is still actually a very, very low penetration with a huge amount of headroom. So we're definitely operating at the cutting edge of this space. So as part of that, we're very eco-conscious. We deliver on e-bikes, we deliver goods in paper bags, a lot of loose items, and our waste, if there is any, goes to charities and local food banks. So we are intending to be a zero waste business. Next slide, please. The proof is in the pudding here. A lot of people would say, oh, this feels as though it's just, encouraging people to sit on the sofa. People love this service. It's an NPS of 81. We offer a great service. Here's Harry Wallop of the Times receiving a delivery from us. Customers love this service. We've been a bit of a godsend during COVID, but the minute the pandemic goes away, this is still an incredibly useful service for people who are short of time. And our customers are typically ones who are, as I said, shopping by the seat of their pants anyway. Next slide, please. A very key element, and this is at the center of where Door Drop fits in. We do not operate across the UK. And even in a city like London, this is our current footprint. We're not even out in areas like Harrow or Kingston or Bromley, right? We are operating in areas first and foremost where we have a catchment area that is that we can deliver to within this sort of promise of a 15-30 minute sort of window that is hyper convenient, and we can get to without our customer delivery reps flying around recklessly. That is not the objective here. So we have a footprint that is extremely precise, and we're in London, we're in Manchester, we're in Brighton and Bristol, and we will continue to expand throughout the UK and beyond in due course. So next slide, please. With all this in mind, and having given a bit of context behind the business and what we do, these are all the reasons for door dropping in particular being an incredibly powerful medium for us. As I've explained, we effectively, our warehouses, we have technology that determines where we can basically deliver to with a packing time of 5 or 6 minutes, and then a delivery time of say 6, 7, 8 minutes. That determines where we deliver to. We clearly have peak times where Friday night gets super busy, but we have incredibly precise catchment areas and serviceable markets. And actually, it's not done at a postcode or post sector level. So we do actually have a very precise zone, which does mean that we have partial post sectors and partial postcodes covered. But the stage that we're at, which is a hyper growth stage, we're trying to gain share and we're trying to run extremely fast. The ability of door dropping to be as targeted as we can possibly be, but also hitting a broad segmentation has been an incredibly valuable channel for us. The segmentation piece is really important from the early stage of our business, but increasingly going forward. In the early stage of a business like Wheezy, like, we don't have the time, we don't have the team. Back in January, you know, I was the marketing department. I had been for a few months, myself on my own, and with quite a lot of VC money and pressure on my shoulders, right? So, like, I'm going to go broad, and I'm going to try and effectively have a fairly generic strategy that runs across like my locations. And initially, I was actually targeting with a different promo code that was sort of run by each of these segments, but my creative had to be broad. As we move forward, the ability to actually use data to plan door dropping at a pretty hyperlocal level, using Mosaic data to understand the makeup of the audiences in those communities, or cross-referencing data with our own response data, customers that have the highest LTVs or propensity to shop with us, then allows me to target post sectors that have a very high penetration of my target audience. I can do that, and we will increasingly do that and use a combination of portfolio approach that others have mentioned with door drops, partially addressed mail, and direct mail. But to date, it's been incredibly useful and valuable. We've had amazing results just using door drop. We've had amazing response rates from Pam as well with the tests that we've done. So we expect that to continue. The audience, if you think about a brand like us, all of these audit channels that are available to us, it's all very well being able to target someone digitally based on where they live. But the whole point of door dropping is clearly we're reaching these people at the place of response. This whole clicks and mortar model. You know, if you're a software business, would door dropping work? I'm sure it would. But the beauty of targeting someone within the household on the door drop with something that stands out is that this is the place at which they're going to respond. And if I'm hitting somebody at any point in the week, grocery shopping is something that you do, like, is relevant to you at least 3 times a day if you're thinking purely of meal times. But there's clearly, like, throughout the day, we're always thinking about consuming fast moving consumer goods. So it's obvious that targeting somebody in the home is going to be more powerful for us than potentially somebody walking down the street, or somebody being in town who I'm hitting digitally through Facebook, who then goes back to their place of their home, which is not in a catchment area of ours. So there's clear value in being able to reach exactly the right audience at the point at which we want to reach them. We are, you know, in a very, very competitive space. I know that from a reach and frequency space, I can hit basically everybody that I want to reach. There may be some times where there's competition from a booking perspective, but I know that I can hit this audience pretty frequently, and I can reach all of the households that I can deliver to. So, you know, in terms of gaining share and being able to get in front of every customer that I know my competitors are also talking to, I can reach those people. It's not like a billboard that is taken. I can't reach that. I can get through that. I can get through the letterbox. There's the visibility of being able to do this. You know, with digital channels, it was alluded to earlier, the dwell time. I'm getting my marketing materials into the household, and I'm giving them a chance to digest it. I've worked with business before that have a much longer consideration cycle. I've actually worked for a grocery business, and we're trying to generate a weekly shop. So there's a dwell time there, but there's still, people don't know when they need a top-up shop, and actually we're in the house, and we see our response profile as being it can often be as long as 8 to 10 weeks. So there is a very long response profile in terms of time. And then the deliverability here, I think, you know, algorithms are great, but they're also they're taking decisions for you, and that can be incredibly frustrating. The ability to know that I can hit my customers, and I can start to target exactly the customer that I want with a different message, I can really control that. I've worked for businesses before that have done research that has told them that a high socio-demographic audience values their service, and they've struggled to reach them on Facebook because it's been so focused on customers that they've initially acquired. They've really struggled to go into new markets and hit new audiences. So I think the value of being able to deliver to the right customer is a huge benefit to this channel. As I alluded to earlier, it's like, from a performance perspective, this channel outperforms pretty much every other channel that we have, with the exception of referrals. And referrals, clearly we're targeting our own audience here, so there's no media cost to that. But with taking into account the cost of postage and the cost of printing, the cost of discounting, this is still, from an affordability perspective, like our best paid channel. Scale, great retention. We can do lots of testing. We can analyze the retention, the frequency, how much, sort of gross margin are we generating over the first 30, 60, 90 days of our customers' lifetime with us, and predict lifetime value. Investors love LTV CAC ratios, and ours is great through this channel. So it is very positive from that perspective. And getting better, because there are so many different levers that we can tweak. And then there's the creative aspect. There are a number of ways in which, as a brand, you can get a message across. TV, radio, you can get a great message across, but they're expensive, right? This is a very affordable way to get a very, very strong message across through, and deliver brand salience, which is one, it delivers response, and that's great. But there's actually enough in there for you to position yourselves versus competition, for you to get across how you're different. It's not just about getting the response, the traffic, the first sale or whatever. You're able to position yourself versus competition, which in our industry is incredibly important. I've done research before that has really delved into brand salience, and I always find that mail it always ranks very high in terms of the ability to get, in a very competitive market, which is a new service, a new product, a new proposition. That's very important, and Door Drops allows us to do that. Next slide, please. So we were at the start of the year. We had an incumbent as a startup when I joined. The business, which had raised some seed funding, was operating with a sort of not quite a one-man band business, but somebody who was able to get stuff through the door, and it was useful during a scrappy launch stage, right? There was, we were getting stuff done, we were getting some results, but what we lacked was proper account management. Communication was poor, planning was pretty poor, reporting wasn't great, managing supplier relationships. This guy was the supplier as well as everything, but it was we wanted to basically professionalize our approach to this channel. And so I called upon Andy, who was somebody I've worked before, and over the last 5 months or so, the performance and growth in this channel has grown leaps and bounds. It's completely transformed this channel for the business. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Andy. He's going to talk with a bit more detail about how he's helped us.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Mark. Just important for us, I think, to start. Jamie set the scene there really well, thank you. And what I'm going to talk about really is just how we, as a brand and as a business, managed to pick up the mantle, if you like, of where they got to and what they'd achieved within the business, and then move that forward to the point where we could then move it and basically progress, and also integrate new channels. So Jamie alluded to the fact that we've started running PAM tests. We're viewed to then maybe taking it forward next stage. And one of the things that you sort of set the scene of this, the success brings its own set of challenges. Jamie's working on his own. He started building teams around himself, but the actual specific skills that they needed and required to actually scale this as a channel when they expanded to new areas was lacking a little bit. So we came in, as we do as an agency, to support and surrounded ourselves with our partners that we use to deliver, which includes things such as the print and Whistle with the delivery and the planning. And in the first phases, the sort of we worked with the existing partners. We kind of tested, and then we optimized with them, but we also then realized that in order for this to scale further, we needed to look at a larger, more reliable national based service. Next slide, please, Mark. So we talked about the fact that you're not just in London, and an original supplier, when the business was launched in Fulham and Chelsea area, could be handled by a relatively small team based in London. Whereas when Manchester came online, Bristol and Brighton, we then had to look to a larger distribution network, Royal Mail being the obvious one. And we had to taken into consideration that actually there were, as a channel, it was performing well with its incumbent supplier. So we didn't want to lose any of the results, but we needed to maintain and improve the distribution. Next slide, please, Mark. What do we do? Well, one of the things that we looked at, as well as looking at the supplier, was we actually had to also consider in terms of the actual creative in its testing and the creative formats. And we've heard today some fantastic examples of creativity and creative testing. I think Jamie and I both got some good ideas. Thank you, guys. But one thing we are going to look at doing is just give you some flavour of some of the things that we integrated and we instilled, which is that, running the same creative, and Jamie alluded to the fact that he can get to all of his audience in a certain fixed radius, which we agree with. But there was, in order to keep the messaging fresh and the messaging engaged with the audience, we needed to offer up different creatives. We also needed to test to optimize the CPM to work out exactly how we can get this to resonate with our audience at the lowest cost. One thing I just added in there, one of the things that we worked in quite closely with Whistle is we were looking at frequency of distribution, and in many products and many cycles, we were talking around 3 monthly cycles for door drops for optimization and response. We actually found that because of the type of product this is, that the frequency could be dramatically reduced, and we could actually go back to households on a far more frequent basis. And that is something that we're continually testing in order to ensure that we are optimizing our engagement within an audience that we're educating and growing. Next slide, please. This is just another example of some of the creative different samples from we tried from DL to A5. And it just gives you the kind of view of some of the offers that we're looking at in terms of running the discounted initial sale. We did find that, and Jamie will remind the most powerful is at 50% off, plus 50% off for offer. Seems to be working relatively well at the moment. So actually getting people into habit-forming behaviours. So we're talking about LTV of every customer. We were trying to get to them to the point where they actually, are using Wheezy more than just we want something now and here. It's a fad. We want them to become a regular purchasing cycle. Next slide, please, Mark. One of the challenges that we have with any door drop and any media, which is and with a client that has a footprint, and Jamie showed you some of the footprints in London areas, when they design their catchment areas, they don't design them with postcodes in mind. So we have a particular challenge where a postcode fits in a certain area, but the coverage of their service doesn't actually have a full postcode coverage. So we have to make a decision as to whether it's worth us marketing potentially to individuals or to households that aren't actually covered by the Wheezy service. So we've worked very closely with them, and what we've actually evolved into is actually integrating a mixture of postcode level targeting through the raw mail, but also utilising on-street teams to actually then deliver to postcodes where we have partial or slight penetrations in a view to try and optimize the coverage to the Wheezy audience, but reduce the amount of engagement with people who literally may well want to use the service and love it, but can't actually get it. And one of the other things that has allowed us to do as well is to utilise in those areas other channels. And we talked about the integration and testing of PAM, which allows us to go down to a far smaller level rather than sector to individual postcodes. So that has a double effect. PAM obviously looking at targeting areas where we have a better idea of our target audience and penetration, where the penetration of our type of profiled audience isn't as high as we'd like, so we can go to specific postcodes, but also to go into areas where we know that we just can't get coverage in enough to warrant door dropping the whole sector. Next slide, please. And this is really it. I'm going to hand back to Jamie very quickly to summarise and just talk about. He talked about the competition, but really, we've talked about the performance, the fact that door drop is outperforming digital in many instances. It allows us to scale and stabilise the growth of a very exciting and very ever-changing, evolving brand almost on a daily basis. And yeah, we do see that dual drops being a considerable part of the future. So to you, Jane.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy. This is a really key point. For those that are familiar with this sector, will have seen all of these brands, or some of these brands out and about. I mean, clearly Uber Eats and Deliveroo is known to everybody. They actually address this channel very differently to us. Like, we have our own dark stores, we manage our own inventory, everything is vertically integrated. We know what's available. There are no substitutes with us, because you're living around the corner and you're ordering what's available and having it delivered. Whereas Uber Eats and Deliveroo are picking up from grocery retailers, the Morrisons and the like. So, but the Zaps and the Gettiers, Gorillas, hugely funded businesses. But as you may be aware, their predominant proposition is very much around essentials and the delivery in minutes and cravings and all those sorts of things, which we feel is addressing a very commoditized aspect of this industry. As I alluded to earlier, our position is we're the modern local grocer. We're a grocery business. We almost are that sort of digital version of that very familiar thing of the local, whether it's borough market or your local corner store, run by a local independent who knows everything about like great local food, whether that be sort of like, artisan products or those fresh products. So we are going to, continue to double down on that. And I think in this webinar, people alluded to some amazing creative features that actually are things on the plan around the sort of like the aroma aspect, to be able to communicate through this medium and like scratch and sniff, smells like your fresh bread. Well, we can deliver fresh bread to you like in minutes. That is transformational in this space. And it's also the type of things that they lead to a higher average order value when you're focusing on these things that are driving a higher emotional element. And so the ability of us to communicate with our audience at the point at which they respond, at the point at which they're going to actually consume our product, this is a channel that enables us to do that. And we also talked a little bit about the use of tools like Mosaic to be able to look at each of our fulfillment center catchment areas. If I compared our Neasden catchment area to our Bermondsey catchment area to our Fulham catchment areas, the makeup is very different. We hugely over-index on city prosperity segments and things like that because of the nature of our brand and our business strategy. But there are elements within that, there are types within that we are under indexed on, and we want those customers, and we'll be able to find out where they live, and we know the nature of those audiences, and so we can talk to them very differently. So this is a channel that allows us to do that in a very affordable way. So it's 100% the next steps for Wheezy are to already in play, to get very, very focused on the customer, the target customer, and to deploy a really interesting brand and a number of pillars of what we do, and to highlight those things to customers, and generate a very loyal audience. And Andy showed some examples of our creative, and there's people thinking, crikey, we're giving away a lot of our VC money through discounting. The first month for a business such as ours is very similar to a free trial. You build habit and all those sorts of things, but it's absolutely something that we monitor constantly. So giving away a lot of discount for the first and second order definitely encouraged habit and retention. But we're going to be testing a lot of different ways in which we encourage people to choose us in a very competitive market. Grocery is a very, very hard habit to break. We've had a lot of success breaking habits to date, but it's going to get tougher and more competitive. And we see this as a very, very powerful channel along that journey. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd be delighted to answer them. But that's it from us.